This is To Help You Heal, and I'm your host, Marie Monville. We are going to spend 10 minutes talking about healing. What kind of healing do you need? Is it in your mindset? Is it emotional healing? Is it spiritual healing? You know, there's a lot of healing that we all need, and this is where you're going to find it every week, 10 minutes on Tuesday. I'm so glad you're spending this time with me. Welcome to week 2 in our 4-part series on grieving. Last week we talked about just the baseline of what grief is. What does it look like from a place of symptoms? How do we see that, kind of evolving in ourselves if we're going through some type of grieving process? What's normal? What's the time frame that's normal? Why does grieving feel so hard? We talked about those things last week. And so this week I really want to focus in on some misconceptions that maybe other people have said to us, misconceptions that we've believed just out of a place of not having gone through this before, not really knowing what this is supposed to look like. Let's talk about those. What to do with unhelpful advice and why our mindset matters. I'm sure if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that I'm big on mindset. Everything starts with the way that we talk to ourselves and what we think about ourselves. So, this, of course, is going to be so crucial as we're going through some type of grieving process. What do we think about ourselves in this? What are we telling ourselves? And how do we keep track of maybe some things that other people have said that are unhelpful and let them go? Because the reality is, people are going to say things, and sometimes it's not going to feel like it was of any value to us. And I think a lot of that really comes from a good place. You know, if we want to step back and be a little bit objective and say, okay, why do people give unhelpful advice? I think one, they want to fix things. If we're telling somebody that, how difficult something is right now, or the weight of the grief that we feel, whether that's a place of anger or sorrow or disbelief, whatever it is, they probably want to fix it for us. And so maybe they're saying something that someone else has said to them. Maybe they really haven't had a personal experience of grief yet in their life. And so they're just going on what they've heard other people say. And sometimes people just say things. It just comes out. Maybe they thought about it afterwards and thought that was a really dumb thing to say, but it's too late then. And they don't want to go back and make you feel sad. So they don't come back to the conversation. So let's just say, you know what? People are going to say dumb things. Sometimes what they say to us about grief is not going to be helpful. And we have to know what to do about that for ourselves. So let's start out by talking through a couple of those common misconceptions about grief. One, grief and mourning are the same. We talked about this a little bit last week. They are different. Mourning is what it looks like to other people. Grief is really what's happening inside of us. Here's another one. Grieving happens in predictable stages. Have you ever heard someone talk about that Kubler-Ross, the stages of grief? Well, psychologists have discovered that that's not really accurate. People don't move predictably through stages of grief. It doesn't happen predictably. You might be in this place of denial. You might find yourself in anger. You might, go back to denial at some point. You're not just going to move through and never feel a way that you've already felt. It doesn't happen that way. Another one, if you're not crying, you're not grieving. Have you ever heard that? I think that especially we might think about that with men, just this place of, okay, he's not crying. That means he's not grieving. And men do process grief differently than women. But I think for any of us, again, that outward expression of mourning, maybe some people do cry more than others. I know for me, I don't like to cry unless I'm with people that I feel like I can really trust that will hold space for me to be so vulnerable like that. So I'm not going to cry a lot in public, but it doesn't mean that I'm not grieving when I've walked through loss. Here's one. Maybe you've wanted to kind of embrace this misconception for yourself. Ignoring the pain will make it go away. Not true. It just pushes it off to a place where we can kind of pretend it's not there. It's not going to go away. It's going to come back. And sometimes it comes back in something that doesn't look like grief. Maybe it comes back in anger or being short tempered with somebody else that has nothing to do with the situation. When we're not processing our emotions, they don't just evaporate, they stay there and they get into other things. They might get into the way we see ourselves, the way we see possible opportunities or other things going on in our life. They also might get into relationships. So I think it's important to remind ourselves, look, it's not going to go away. I need to process this and deal with it. Here's one I mentioned last week as well: time heals all wounds. I believe that this is not true at all. All time does is give us the opportunity to learn how to live life without someone and to get better at doing that. But it's not, time's not a healer on its own. We have to be intentional about going after the healing that we need. Here's another misconception people say: at some point, you're going to need to get over it. No, we need to embrace the process of healing from it. It's not going to be this place that we just snap our fingers and get over it. It's not like turning on a light switch. You can't just do it. It is a gradual progression of steps. Getting angry won't help anything. Have you heard someone say that to you before? Anger is a very normal part of grief. And so if you find yourself getting angry, it does help because it's allowing you to release that kind of emotion. Now, again, you want to make sure that you're doing this in healthy ways. I've heard of these like smash studios where you can go and break things, plates and whatever. That's a great way to get some anger out. Find something that you can do that's healthy. Clearly, we don't want to be getting our anger out on other people, but it is important to allow yourself to process that if that's what you're feeling. Here's one: if I had more faith, I wouldn't be struggling. I had a conversation with someone not too long ago who was in a grieving space, and she said that to me. She said, if I had more faith, I wouldn't be struggling. And I said, you know what? It is not about having faith or not having faith. It's about allowing yourself to process where you are. And your emotions need some time and they need some attention from you. So let's talk about how we feel. When we hear those misconceptions or when we're thinking them of ourselves, how do they make us feel? They make us feel frustrated or that we're doing it wrong. They can make us feel cynical, resentful, make us feel like we just want to avoid it or avoid people, makes us feel vulnerable and guilty. So now, not only do we have all of this grief that we're trying to deal with and walk through, but we have these feelings that are getting in the way of the grief or stacking on top of it that we have to process as well. And it really can get in the way of our relationships with other people, relationships with God. Certainly if there's somebody in your life who is saying things to you on a regular basis that's not helpful, you're probably going to want to start avoiding them, or it's just going to change the way you think about them. And sometimes it really gets in the way of our relationship with God. We can feel alone, abandoned by our friends, and ultimately by God. Because there's this thing that happens when we are grieving. It seems like everybody else's life is moving forward and we're just stuck in this place. So we can feel very alone. And if you're walking this road, you've joined me in this podcast because you want to be intentional and hold space for somebody else who's processing some type of grief. I just want to encourage you to check in on them and to allow them to talk. I get that after a while we might get tired of hearing them talk about the same thing, but they need you to give them space to do that, to say the individual's name, whether the person has died, whether they have some kind of severing of relationship. They need to be able to talk about it. So do what you can to engage that place so that they don't feel alone. Because when we feel alone or when we start to believe what other people have said to us, it can make the whole grieving process feel so much harder because now we feel like we've lost something else. We've lost this relationship. We've lost a bit of who, we thought we were. So when we also think about this whole thing of dealing with misconceptions, we need to reframe them. We need to change the way we see it. So let's talk about an objective process by which we can do that. We can ask ourselves, okay, this thing, is it true? Whether it was something someone said to us or maybe something we kind of took on for ourselves, is it true? And did it come from a place of genuine concern? If it's something somebody said to you, was it genuine? Did it come from a good place? Can you look at this outside of yourself a little bit objectively and say, okay, I can give them the benefit of the doubt that this came from this place of genuine concern. So, how do I want to respond to them? And then after that, what's the truth that I create for myself? It's okay to say to somebody, if somebody's saying to you, you know what, time heals all wounds, you just need to give yourself some time. It's okay to say to them, actually, time's not going to heal this. I have to embrace the process of healing. Time's going to give me the opportunity to practice living without them, but it's not going to heal the wounds. It's okay to correct them, to share a little bit from your perspective. You just have to figure out how do you want to respond. And then going forward, what's that place of truth that you want to create for yourself? What do you want to take away from that conversation? We have to check in on ourselves with our self-talk any day of the week and of course when we're grieving. It takes practice and it really begins with that place of awareness, using strategies that help us process frustration, inventorying our thoughts. We can ask ourselves if we're starting to feel frustrated, this is what I do and happen, this can apply across the board, doesn't just have to be in a grieving situation. I ask myself a couple questions. Why do I feel frustrated? What is my responsibility and what do I need to do with it? I think that helps us to know, okay, what am I going to do with this? Coming out of this space, what do I want to do with these feelings? What do I want to do with this relationship? Because the truth is, we need support. We need people around us that are helping us and holding us up, but we also need to know how to support ourselves. I'm a big fan of art and mindfulness, some type of, art activity that can really be healing. If you look those up on YouTube, you're going to find a million options. I want you to think about what you're doing to support yourself. How are you helping yourself heal? Are you having those good conversations where you can be vulnerable with other people? Are you creating space for the people who are in your life and are grieving to have those conversations with you? And then how do you deal with that? How do you help yourself? Are you creating some opportunities for self-care? Whether that's taking a walk, giving yourself space to just take a shower, take a nap, whatever you need, do some art activities. Let's think about those things. It's going to help us heal. Like I said last week, grief isn't something that we can just kind of put to the side. We are going to have to deal with it, but it doesn't mean that it has to be this thing we dread. We can embrace it as the healing process it really is. And that's what I want to talk about next week. Come on back here and spend week 3 in our grieving journey with me as we talk about our path to healing. I'll see you then.